Hey there! Today we're going to be making this a Helm weave bracelet. It's using 3 different sizes of rings and 2 different colors of rings in this example. And here's a real quick side view of it. For materials, we have a lobster clasp, 35 18 gauge 3/16 inch inner diameter rings, 28 18 gauge 5/16 inch rings, and 13 16 gauge 5/16 rings. There are going to be links down below for all of those materials. Now you'll see we have some pre-opened and some pre-closed rings, and that's important to note because when they arrive, they are not fully opened or closed because they were cut off of a coil. To open, just grab both sides firmly with your pliers and twist either toward or away from yourself. And that's how our 3/16 and our thicker 5/16 inch rings. And then to close, we just wiggle back and forth so that the ends line up, applying a little bit of pressure to put the ends towards each other so we have a complete loop. And that's how our 18 gauge 5/16 rings are. Now we're going to grab one of our 18 gauge 3/16 inch rings, and we're going to put 4 of the thinner 5/16 rings on there. And then close the small ring. And then we are going to double up that small ring, putting another ring through all 4 of those. Sometimes it helps to split the group of 4 into 2 to make it a little bit easier to get through everything, and close. Now we're going to take and split the larger rings here into 2 pairs of 2. Take one of our thick rings and wrap it around the small rings in the middle, not through any of the larger ones. It is just orbiting the, in this case, black rings. Then we're going to close that. Then we're going to fan out the larger, thinner rings so that it sandwiches, so they sandwich the thicker ring. Then we're going to take a couple of these small black rings, put them on one side with no additional rings in them. And this is just to lock our first end in place. And close that second ring. And then we're going to take another one of those small rings, put it through those 2, and then add our lobster clasp and close it. And now we have our clasp end of the project, and everything else will be worked on the opposite end from here. We're going to pick up another one of our small rings, put it through the 2 thinner rings at the end, then take and add 2 more of our thin rings and close. And then, as with all of the other ones, we're going to double up the small ring. And now here's where things get a little bit tricky because we need to get a thick ring sandwiched in there. So we're going to take and between the previous thin rings, we're going to spiral that ring in so that it is sandwiched in between, but also not through the black rings, and then pull one of our loose thin rings so that it is on our side of the thick ring, and close the thick ring. And it should now be able to be sandwiched between the 2 thin rings. And we're going to do that again. Small ring with 2 thin rings added to it. Close. Add a second small ring. rings. Grab one of our open, thicker rings, wind it in between the thinner rings that are secured, and then move one of the loose thin rings to be on opposite sides from the other loose ring. Close our thicker ring. And we just continue on like this, making sure we remember to double up the small rings. You can do it with just one, but I find that it looks more secure, looks more complete with two. Bringing in our thicker ring so that it can orbit around the small rings. Now, there are multiple ways of weaving Helm weave, and this just happens to be the one that I prefer. It's just the way my brain understands it best. I'm going to show you now, real quick, just another way of weaving this. We're going to start by weaving two of our small rings into the end of the piece as it is, not adding any additional thin rings at this time. Make sure you remember to add the second one. And then we're going to take and weave that thick ring in between the thin rings that are there, but also around the small rings. And there's none of the additional thin rings to worry about here at this time. Then we're going to pick up, and in my case I need to open them because I pre-close my rings and just put them through the small rings on either side of the thick ring so that it is sandwiched in between them. Now you get to watch me fight with a ring because I can't find where my closure is because I had pre-closed it. And then weave it into the other side, and it brings us to the same place that the method that I used previous to this and will finish this piece out with uses. Like, we end up at the same place in the end. So I'm going to continue on my normal way that includes adding those thin rings as we go, as we add the small rings instead of having them an entirely different step. It is a little bit more fiddly, like I said, because of that thick ring, but it is the way that I prefer. You can deal with adding additional length onto these in two different ways. You can either add more of these units that have the rings orbiting small rings, or you can just add additional smaller rings at the end of the piece. And the way we're going to fasten off this piece is we're going to take two of our small rings, similar to what we did at the beginning, and put them through the thinner rings. And then we're going to take another ring and put it through these two small rings, and then do a little bit of just 1 by 1 chain, which just means putting one ring into another ring. It's a very basic chain method, and there are ways of doing this where some of them are pre-closed and some of them aren't, but I'm just showing that you can do it with all of them open without issue. Now this bracelet is sized for about 7.5 inches based on the smallest size done with the lobster clasp clipped into these rings at the end. Like I said, there are multiple ways of dealing with extending it. This is what it looks like finished. And it is a moderately flexible bracelet. If you liked this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe.